Alex,
Hello.
thank you for joining me.
Yeah, not cool. Looking forward to it.
We've both been looking forward to this
Yeah,
quite a while now.
it has been
Finally
quite a
do
while.
it.
Yeah. 9 months later, probably, give or take. Yeah,
It's nice because we've got to know each other quite well to then have a potentially different conversation to if we've done it 4 or 5 months ago.
definitely. Yeah.
Take me back to a young Alex, the kind of early who and what influences that affected your career decisions.
I was very lucky when I was younger, surrounded by family, being granddad, dad, a lot of aunts, uncles, etc., where I was always surrounded by people who were sort of highly professionally motivated, had really good core morals, and kind of family unit was very big to me. And I was so lucky, I guess, in that group of us, where our family was quite big actually. In total, there's now about 30 of us in my sort of extended family, so it's a good social group. But everyone's sort of always been balanced on kind of enjoy life, but also work very hard and strive for whether it's success or momentum in your career. So I was lucky that really, I mean, from being born realistically, but from what I can remember, 5, 6, upwards 10, 15 into my teenage years, I was always surrounded by great moral sort of, a great moral foundation and a big professional focus.
A lot of resource of knowledge there as well, right? All those people, that, especially because I know you're naturally curious,
Yeah.
you'd have been asking questions and they'd have been willingly giving you knowledge, right? A lot of people don't have that in their family and surrounding.
It's a really good observation. I think when I was sort of became more conscious, more of sort of 16 onwards, I became very, very curious about the world of business. It was just my interest, right? I was never interested overly in like sport and really any other subject massively. Suddenly, as soon as I sort of understood the dynamics of business, I became just like instantly sort of attracted to the concept of it. I think as well, like a lot of entrepreneurs don't necessarily talk about this as openly, but I'm very like financially motivated. I think as soon as I equated like financial success and security and things like that together, I became very just observant, if you like, of like working hard, making a sort of financial success of yourself can empower so many aspects of your life. And I really think about that a lot now, whether I'm investing or like working in different businesses with founders and things like that. Like I don't think people should be ashamed of that and talk about it more openly, because it's a big part of building a company, right? So
Totally. And you could argue if you're not financially motivated, you've got to have a seriously strong why as to why else you're doing it. And there are reasons for that, right? It could be you're trying to save the planet from climate destruction or whatever, but then you've still got to ultimately, to be successful, ultimately, you've got to focus on making some money out of it. Looking after yourself.
Totally. I think, that's one string, financial success, whether that's in business or personally, to, your life and your entrepreneurial journey. You have to have wider motivations. There's plenty of studies that back that up. Like, what do you want to work on? What are you passionate about? What motivates you from sort of an engagement perspective? And I've been very lucky, again, I, from a relatively young age, was always able to pinpoint the subject matter I wanted to work in and the fascination I had around it. So I was
Jealous
lucky.
of that. I took a long time to find that.
Yeah.
Reverse engineered it.
Yeah. Well, there's no right way to do it, right? I think, again, I reflect on it. I think as a sort of teenager into my 20s, I thought about it a lot. Like you say, I'm a very curious person. So it was always something at the fore of my mind,
You've also got a real priority on self-development. That drew me to you massive. I remember when we were introduced, and then you've got your own website and you go on there, and I was like, this guy wants to be the best version of himself. So do I. It's probably a why behind this whole Extraordinary Stories, right?
Definitely.
To learn from the experiences. So you had that early kind of family group of 60 plus people that you could learn from, but ultimately you then start learning yourself. So you mentioned that sort of age 16 that you go into business. You must have started learning some lessons, brutally, if you like, at that point. Talk to me about that journey.
I think, yeah. I mean, I think for me, that started at university. I think when you go into that environment, it's a bit like, I just used to think, funnily enough, weirdly, it's a bit like Big Brother, that TV program. It's not like that, but you get thrown into this abnormal living environment suddenly, like a different city from what you've grown up in, people from all walks of life. You're on your own kind of thing, and you're having to find your way through different dynamics that you've potentially never been through. You're still maturing as a person. And so they get the life aspect of that, where there's lots of learnings. If you've gone to university, you'll know that experience. And then I obviously was very lucky, again, to dovetail that with some business experience along the way. And I think, to your point, like a big focus of my individual mindset has been around how do you operate at your best? And that doesn't mean just professionally. Like, how can you put yourself in the best light, physically, mentally, professionally, family? I've always been a very deep thinker, and that has always carried me through, like pursuing those things as almost things to like constantly work on. And
they
I
go
just,
hand in hand as well, right? If
do.
you're looking after yourself physically, that's looking after your brain, you're better in business, right?
Totally. Yeah. It took me a while to learn that, actually. So weirdly, although I'm much better at it now, and I've always had a very self-driven and, like you say, sort of self-analytical perspective on myself about how to get better and improve. I did all the usual things through your 20s, where if you're running a business, you're in your 20s, you're partying hard, you know, going out drinking, you know, you still mask things with the sort of normal aspects of life that come up. So I was highly indexed on the high performer at work, you know, get a lot done, achieve a lot. But for a period of time, it took me a little while to understand more about the wellness, the mindfulness side, the looking after yourself side, which I think I've spent a lot more time on in the last sort of 4 or 5 years. So I've definitely not perfected it, if you know what I mean.
No, but you've had the time to in the last few years. Whereas, and this is the bit I was getting to, actually, you know, you immersed yourself into business early.
Yeah.
And then you were consumed by it. And what I really love about your story, if you like, is from an entrepreneur point of view, you've come up with an idea, you've then implemented it, you've then raised the money for that opportunity, you've scaled the business, you've brought the staff in, you've gone through the whole journey, and fast forwarding, you've exited.
Yeah.
Which, you know, for the age you're at, which I think, are you 34?
34.
Yeah. I mean, so it gives you huge perspective. And actually, although you probably haven't felt like it at times, the perspective you've got is you've got a lot of time left. You know, you don't necessarily think like that.
I know what you mean.
A lot of people might get to that point in their 60s. And then there's things they can't do, they wish they could have done. You've actually, you know, I don't know if you've ever thought about that. You're at a point in life where there's still so much you can go at and the opportunity, but you can reflect as well, because you find it, because you wouldn't have had any time in the moment, right? You might have just been 1,000 miles an hour.
I think, it's a really, you like observed that very well. I was so in it for about 8 years, and before a little bit as well. It's the typical sort of 10-year overnight success thing, where I reflect on it. I look back on that phase, and I was in it. I mean, work and you know, all of the things attached to it did run my life, and I obviously had lots of other things going on, but every thought, really second thought, was like, well, I've still got to do that tomorrow. I've got a plan for this.
But that's what would have made the business successful, right? Which ultimately it was. You know, we'll come to it, but you exited and you ticked the box of making big money out of it and you know, navigated it. But I guess if you look at it, there's always this talk of balance, isn't there?
Yeah.
You know, so did you ultimately sacrifice friendships, family at that time to be successful in business?
Relationships, definitely. So friendships to a certain extent, that was actually kind of on my list, like as a high priority throughout my whole life, really. But yeah, of course, they generally, you know, you can't always be around for certain things. Definitely missed out on some cool opportunities that people did. Travel, that was one of the big things I look back on quite a lot personally. I've traveled a lot more in the last 3 years. In fact, I've traveled more this year than I have in the last 10 years.
Because it's a priority now, right?
It's a priority.
Because you can.
Totally.
Brilliant.
But yeah, I definitely sacrificed a lot when I look back. But as you say, you don't realize that in the moment. But yeah, I've had 3 years, like you say, where I've been able to recalibrate, which has been very fortunate in a way to be able to do that. You know,
it's great that you've done it though. You know, there's a potential mindset that, and actually we can talk about this almost from an identity point of view. So I'm an entrepreneur, I'm a businessman, I'm living and breathing, I'm consumed by it. Then you exit, you took a breath.
Yeah.
You know, there's part of me I'm 47, so I've got those years on you. I've done things where I've then stopped and gone, okay, I now need to do this. And I haven't come up for that breather. So you consciously made that decision.
Yeah, it probably sounds like I really consciously made it. It was almost forced on me, if I'm honest. It wasn't like I sat down and said, right, I'm going to take 3 years as a breather. In some ways, I found it somewhat frustrating at the time, but it was sort of semi-forced. Like, you get acquired by a very large corporate, just naturally the size of that organization doesn't move anywhere near the size of a 60-ish, you know, 100+ person organization. So that pace, I always reference it to people as like a handbrake being pulled on me, you know, probably over a period of 6 months. And it really, actually, for the first 6 months to a year, it really took me time to adjust. I was running on adrenaline, I was running on high cortisol levels, stress, but actually around me, there wasn't, you know, a fast-paced environment. There wasn't huge amounts of stress, to be totally honest. There were some things that were happening, but like, if you looked at it very objectively, you'd say, actually, Alex, this would be the time where, like you say, you'd naturally recalibrate. But it actually took me a year to sort of come down, if not a bit longer, a year and a half, to come back down to pace, to then do the work that, you know, like I've really recalibrated on health, wellness and things like that. It took me 18 months, I'd say, to like get into a place where I was like, I can actually do this consciously now. And that was a really big adjustment. You talk about identity with entrepreneurs, you know, lost that, had to rediscover what that was.
I was going to say, because I want to come to this, because anyone listening or watching, actually, we know each other well, but I haven't actually asked you what the business was that you started and what it did, and we must do that. But of course, that's your baby. You create it, you escalate it, and then you effectively detach yourself from it. There's an identity loss there, plus the work ethic, the whole thing goes. So let's cover all of that. Let's talk about ContentCal. You created that business. What was the why behind it, and the journey, and then we'll come to kind of exiting.
Yeah, so the why behind it was, I was, again, quite fortunate that, well, I say fortunate, I think lucky in a way, when I look back, that at university, I stumbled on social media marketing when it was very niche. I was really intrigued by, this is again my curiosity at sort of this, when I was like 18, 19. Why do I decide what to buy, and what shapes what bars and restaurants I go to? And at the time, when Facebook was much more sort of prolific as a platform, it was everything I saw on there. All my friends would buy Abercrombie, so I'd buy Abercrombie because it was cool. They'd go to this bar on this evening. It was a great environment. I could see pictures of it. I'd go there. And it just hit me in like I can actually pictorially remember it. I've got a bit of photographic memory. See, on my laptop, I was like, this is going to be pretty big for businesses. Like at the time it wasn't. There was no advertising on Facebook, or close to zero. There was no real brands, but there was a bit of a mechanism for it. And I was like, I am making basically all of my life decisions, purchasing, where I go and stuff like that, based on social media. And then I went into this rabbit hole of social media marketing as a concept when it was literally new. And it was very maturing, if you like, or growing in the US, but there was no presence of the concept in the UK. So I do this with certain things. I just like read and just like gorged on information and just learned for myself like how this stuff works. And then I went to some family members who have some businesses and said, I'll run all your social media for you. Again, before it was really a thing.
Literally learning by other,
just doing, So I spent like 2 years and my last 2 years of uni just literally dabbling in social media marketing, making some decent cash when this was all brand new. This was a brand new thing. And then graduated and got a social media management role at Odeon Cinemas, again, when this was all new. So imagine conceptually being paid to go in and sit on social media for a business was just like not taken that seriously. And I was, again, lucky, fortunate, whatever you want to call it, but like as the rise of social media became so popular personally in the business, my career has completely ridden that wave. So as priorities got more important, social media became more and more prolific and public for businesses. I moved from Odeon to Now TV when that was launching to run their social media. I decided within that world, because that was run by Sky, that corporate life just wasn't for me. That setting wasn't for me. I'm very entrepreneurial as a person. So what I effectively did over sort of a 3-year period in my early career was objectively look at how is social media run for these big businesses? How does it run for small businesses? Set up an agency to help them, from a consultancy management perspective, run their social media, after I left Sky. Did that for a couple of years. And what I'd learned through all of that and sort of simultaneously, and you can tell my brain works at 100 miles an hour.
1,000 miles an hour.
1,000 miles an hour, probably, yeah, is that all the spreadsheets we use, this is like sort of detail, but all the spreadsheets and processes we use were just not fit for purpose. And I was like, how do I create a platform that I would use every day?
So there was the why. There was you by being immersed in it, you found the need and you found something you could solve.
Precisely. Brilliant. And it was like, on a practical level, it was like, how do I make social media easier to do? On a more philosophical level, I was like, work is a big part of my life. How do you make your job easier? How do I create a tool or a system? And again, it sounds a bit like, big thinking, but I was like, how do I make something that makes people's day job easier? That was my goal.
Brilliant reason to do it.
Yeah, I know. And I didn't think much more of it at the time. And then the whole journey obviously unfolded from there. So built ContentCal over 8 years, raised $14 million, 10 million pounds from different investors in the UK, Angel and VC. Went through the process of building, like you say, the management team, scaling up the wider team, managed through COVID, which was crazy. And then in December 2021, sold to Adobe.
Yeah. And I listened to a podcast actually, even though we know each other and had countless conversations, it was amusing because there was a lot of, I can't say that. And I can't answer that. And that's still in, whereas you're technically free now, in context of, which, so that must be good. And can we say the number that you exited?
You can say it. I can comment a lot.
Million?
Potentially something.
There's always been talked of north of 100 million. It's a phenomenal number. And I want to cover that in a slightly different way because of how we know each other. In context, that's huge success. That is the holy grail. You're an exited founder. And I know you haven't stopped there. You've invested in 60 plus businesses, but you technically don't need to work again.
Yeah.
You're at this point, you're 31.
I was 31 when we did the deal. Yeah.
But you actually, I want to go through that kind of, almost that moment that the check cleared, and it wasn't that feeling, was it? It wasn't this whole like, talk me through that.
I was actually on a Zoom call. I can't remember what the meeting was, to be honest, but I was on the Zoom call when the check cleared, literally, and I was obviously checking my bank account, being like, when is it happening?
This is the day you're expecting, it's coming in.
Yeah. And it is very odd because, I mean, literally, again, I've got a pretty photographic memory, so I can literally remember looking down at my phone, looked at my banking app, lots of numbers, and I was just like, oh, like, it means so much.
Yes.
At the same time, it's literally numbers on the screen. But it's not that, because actually it's, practically more. But it's the delineation between I'm looking on my mobile phone and looking at lots of zeros and ones, and actually my day life, I lived in my same flat. I did the deal in that I've lived in London for, 4 or 5 years before that, 2-bedroom flat in Wandsworth. I hadn't bought anything extravagant. Obviously, I mean, the cash had only just landed, but my headspace wasn't like, I've got to go and buy this. I wasn't thinking like that at all. It was just like, okay, I just found it really weird, actually, more than anything else.
It's fascinating because there's so many people that dream of winning the lottery and they think that will make them happy.
Yeah.
And obviously I've got my journey, which we talked about, which is financially ambitious, always been. And yet there are times, it's slightly different to you, where money's come in and it's not changed anything. It's not. And I think you've got to go through that journey to understand it. But you actually almost had mental health problems for the first time in your life because you've been too busy, 1,000 mile an hour. You can take your foot off the gas a bit and so on. And then there's that loss of identity.
Yeah.
But there's also that kind of, what's your purpose?
Totally.
What am I doing now? So how did you get through that? What did you put in place?
Yeah. What basically happened to me was I went through a period, and I didn't know it at the time, of, I would say, like light depression. And the challenge I faced was, for the first time ever, to your point, having run at 1,000 miles an hour plus for most of my adult life, actually, in reality, I would wake up, I use references to people, I'd wake up and sort of look in the mirror as I'm getting ready for the day and be like, obviously I've got some stuff to do, but I wasn't overly busy at work. It was sort of post-COVID, which, people are only really just coming out of lockdowns and that really, challenging 2 or 3 years we had. And I'd look in the mirror and I'd be a bit like to myself, what do I do now? What's the point?
There's a loneliness there as well, right? Because also you've isolated yourself to achieve this business goal, but there's so many other things weren't part of your life, right?
And we were working remotely, and there was big transitions as ContentCal. So we lost a lot of the team in the early stages just for practical reasons, and my life had dramatically changed. Relationships were a bit all over the place at that point in terms of that world, and I was just like you said, literally waking up going, what is the point? And I've never asked myself that. From I can remember.
You never had time, to be fair, but I get it. Yeah,
it's partly time, but genuinely from 16, I've always had a plan, as in and a time, and I'm going to do something, even for a year, for a month, for whatever.
So they're goals, aren't they? They're set, and you hadn't got that.
Well, I achieved my goal. Yeah. I literally say to people, in a professional sense, I've achieved everything I've ever wanted to do. I wanted to build a business. I wanted to learn the process of that. I wanted to surround myself with amazing people. I wanted to do deals. I wanted to build a tech platform. I wanted to do all of those things. I wanted to sell it to one of the biggest companies in the world. And by 31, I'd done it. And it's, amazing. But then going, like you say, you've got another, hopefully, quite a few years ahead of you. You're not done professionally, even though you could be. It creates a very complex set of thoughts, basically. Yeah.
So when we connected, so we're January 2025 now, we connected sort of the summer of 24. And we've got Jack that links us now, and I could see that whole self-development side of things that was important to you, mental health, and I felt a real connection when we first, I watched your eyes widen, and we were both on, it was a Zoom, wasn't it? And then you go, and I watched, it was like a balloon filling up. I was like, this is exactly what I thought, which is great. Fast forward, we can talk about it now because it's official. You're officially part of Jack. How much of what Jack's doing and sort of almost was needed in your life as much as what you can then give back with these incredible skill sets that you developed and nurtured?
Yeah, I mean, the story. I came into Jack at the end of an investment cycle, like you said, really interested in the platform, but sort of disinterested in investing in any more businesses. And I was very still unsure, what I was going to do next at that point, because I was sort of coming towards the last 6 months of my earn out with Adobe. And I think you said it really well. You're like, just come into the office, just give us an hour or whatever it is. And I was like, okay, fine. And then I think we were supposed to be in there for an hour, right? And I think we spent 3 hours.
The memorable meeting.
Yeah, it was pretty cool. Yeah. And then literally a week after, another 3 hours. And I was like, one, I'll definitely invest. Two, I can bring something to the party here. I know what phase you're at of the business. I know the people challenges you're going to have. I know all the things you're going to have to go through. And I am really motivated with the problem this business solves. I think, like I said, I think when I went through some form of like what I call like light depression and whatever it was, I didn't know it. It took me months to figure out what the hell was going on. I went to doctors eventually and things like that and sorted it all out. But like, I didn't have a clue in reality what I was going through. And Jack has just got this incredible capability through delivering content at the right time, right place, right format, all that kind of stuff, to help people understand either what they're going through if they don't know, or if they are aware, give them the tools to learn more about it, understand it, and realize you're not alone, to your point. You're going through this, and everybody in really some form of their life will go through something, whatever it might be. And so I was just so aligned to the mission of that. And having worked in social media for 10 years, I have always understood the dynamic of the massive upside social media offers in terms of connection, business growth, being able to catch up with friends, all of the great stuff that we have social for.
Using it as a force for good, right? Because it gets a really bad rep, and rightly so.
Totally.
Addictive algorithms that can be, actually, if you flip the narrative and you use it as a force for good.
This is the thing, right? You use the stuff that's great for a force of good, but be acutely aware to your point of the addictive nature of my Instagram looks amazing, like I'm doing great stuff every day. It's just not real life. And so I've always been acutely aware through the industry. And there's a book, if the name escapes me, The Anxious Generation, where you can actually correlate depression to when Facebook theoretically started. There's a whole sort of theory around that. It's not really Facebook, it's social media kind of grew.
But Facebook was a big one, wasn't it?
The big one, yeah, right, the big one that
everyone went on, and parents at the time put their kids, their dogs on, and so on, and then
not realizing the consequences. No. Yeah, and so I've been like, as soon as I found Jack, I was like, okay, this is something I can do for another chunk of my life and contribute to the other side of the issues that industry's created. So I love it. Yeah.
Yeah, well, it aligns us, right? It's something we get to spend more time with each other and enjoying it. Just listening to you then, it's amazing when you think about it. You've for your 34 years, you've got the corporate perspective of Now TV and so on, to then the entrepreneur journey. You've raised funds, you've scaled, you've exited, and you have invested in 60 plus businesses. There's a nurturing and mentoring side to you that's clearly there, with so much experience. Like, you could argue it's a full circle. I can tell, even the way you wouldn't even say the number you exited, there's no ego there. There's no arrogance, almost slightly awkward with it, which I really like. But in context of when you choose a business, to talk about Jack, but imagine there's a business opportunity that is coming to you, or an entrepreneur or something. What do you look for? What are the key things that you're sort of dialed in on?
I look at it as like an ingredients list. It's really interesting. I think when I was scaling ContentCal, I reflect a lot on what I learned through that process, both from, like you said, being mentored by people, learning from peers, and managing people and mentoring people. So like you say, it is very 360. And I look at businesses in the round, like, does it have the ingredients at the stage that it's at to potentially go to the moon? And I really, to be honest, only invest in like moonshot style companies. So my personal preference on investing is, let's go for it. If I'm going to invest in this and you want to do it, whether I'm involved or not, you've got to be going for it, to the top of the tier.
It's a smart use of your time though, right? All in.
Otherwise there's no point in my perspective. Yeah. So the ingredients are things like massive space, massive industry. Obviously mental health for Jack is unbelievable. Scale has super important, global scale. Technology fundamentally in some way, shape or form. I think that you can pick your niche, right? Whether it's property, tech, whatever. Mine is technology. It's a space that I know and love. So tech for me is a big thing. Team is critical. And I think that doesn't mean you have to have everyone in place and all the rest of it, but you've got the right dynamic of the people you've got so far. You've got the culture that you want to learn, you want to grow. You're aware of the gaps that the team has. So the team and the management style and all that kind of thing is super, super important. Founder ambition is naturally very, very important. Do you want to change the world? Do you want to, work all the hours and go for it in terms of your mission and everything else? That's super important. And then there's the boring stuff. Have you had funding rounds before? Can you tell your story properly? Are you coachable? What's the funding rounds look like up to now? all the practical stuff. So
super important though.
You
have a super bright
you can't
guy
do the deal without.
He's not coachable, and you're like, I need you to come this way, and he or she can't.
In all honesty, I'd say that's probably one of the biggest skill sets you have to learn, right? I think whether it's a founder, to be honest, anyone in any role, if you aren't coachable and you can't take on feedback and you can't adapt, and people do talk about it a lot in business of being able to adapt, that is the number one personal trait you need to have to be successful.
Yeah, you've articulated that really well. You know, I always ask this, and you're sitting here as a successful businessman and entrepreneur. What is your definition of success?
If you'd have asked me that when I was 20, right, when I was thinking about what I wanted, it was, well, my answer, and it was the concept of freedom. And that to me at the time, when I was 20, was financial freedom equates to I can therefore do what I want with my time.
When you want, with whom you want.
Yeah.
And you're doing a lot of that now.
So I've sort of achieved what that was. However, the downside, like you say, of like the challenge of freedom is, as I sort of say in sort of two years ago, I was sort of going through some mental health stuff. It presents a lot of extra challenges for you to think about, because something like, well, what do you want to do with your time?
Priorities have changed, maturity, perspective.
Exactly.
I get it.
And so I think my definition of success now actually is, it's a bit like, I sort of think about it as almost like self-actualization. Are you self-aware of what your priorities are? Do you feel good about yourself with your self-esteem, how you manage your life? Are your relationships, friendships, family, etc., in a place where you want them to be? Have you professionally achieved what you want or on the way to do it? Have you traveled the world as much as you want to? You know, all of these things. I don't think this definition of success is linked to freedom to me anymore, because actually freedom to me actually presented a huge amount of challenge. The concept of it is lovely, because like you say, everyone goes, oh, I can do what I want whenever I want. It's not about that. It's about, have you got the tools and the inner mindset, basically, to have the equilibrium to enjoy that freedom. That's a very complicated answer the way the words, but that's really what it comes down to for me.
No, totally, I can tell. What I like is that what you're really saying as well is staying curious.
Totally.
Don't close doors, don't shut things down. You know, despite what you've done, you're actually looking for more doors. You're actually looking for more opportunity, because that's what stimulates you. You recognize that.
Yeah.
There's countless self-development books, which, you know, you and I would have read, from all sorts of different people that have been successful one way or another, or have studied success. And I use that word because a lot of people will want to hear and listen to you about what you do to keep both mentally sharp and physically. So do you have a morning routine? Do you kind of get up at 4 a.m. and run a marathon and do the weights and then you like your boxing and stuff? But what works for you? What have you sort of locked on, and how do you prioritize it?
Yeah, I think firstly it took me, literally I'd say it took me 10 years to figure this out. So, you know, again, if I was answering the question, this is why I think it's really important to say it's transitional. You asked me that question when I was 20, it was going out socializing, drinking with my mates, doing whatever, that sort of stuff. And actually what I realized over time, just naturally as you get older, but also as you think about doing activities that are sort of more nurturing to yourself and more actual value additive, you know, physically to yourself, you can't do that for a while, and you're actually masking, you know, where you should be theoretically channeling your energy. So for me, it took me a long time to figure this out. Firstly was understanding, well, what is wellness and mental stability and, you know, personal, like I said, sort of insight and understanding around what are those things to me. And as I started to triangulate it, I started to reflect, like, where do I feel my most relaxed? Where do I channel my energy physically when I want to get it out of me? What makes me feel good afterwards? So I, again, very analytical, as you can tell, but like, I really looked at the times in my life where I felt the most relaxed, the most energized, etc. So things like, this is a really funny one. Well, funny, but it's just kind of like weird. I lived in central London for years, about 15 years. And I was constantly sort of semi-stressed without realizing, right? Just because your physical environment in the city is always a bit more stressed. I used to go to Soho Farmhouse a lot, and I was like, I feel really relaxed when I go to Soho Farmhouse, thinking it was because it was that place. But what I actually realized was it was being in a naturistic environment. It was being in the country, it was fresh air, it was green. And as soon as, it sounds so stupid, but as soon as I understood that, I was like, maybe I should move. So it's things like that. Like I learned that actually being in nature for me, you read about it a lot. Now moved into Surrey, which is a much more sort of green environment. And my stress levels and my like thinking capability just from the environment I'm physically in has completely changed.
It's brilliant that you recognized that and acted on it.
And I did it. Yeah, exactly. It was, you know, scary move as always is when you're moving from somewhere you've lived for a long time, but that's a big one. So nature is super important. Time is very important. And I don't mean that from sort of the luxury of time. I mean, making time to think. I think that thinking and having time to think properly about work challenges, personal stuff, whatever, super important. Mornings for me are that I have a coffee, I journal, and I'm thinking, I'm not necessarily doing anything, but I'm, thinking about all sorts of different things that come up, and making sure there's a good, at least half an hour in the day to just think about stuff,
Brilliant. Especially if you can think in nature, if you combine the whole.
Especially. Yeah. Physically, for me, I fell in love with boxing. I needed at one point in my life, throughout the sort of 3-year earn-out process, a place to channel my physical energy. I went to watch a boxing fight with a trainer who's now my trainer, and I was just like, I'm addicted to this. Love the exercise, love the workouts, great cardio. It's actually very mental as well, because you're kind of constantly thinking about what you need to do in sort of the training and everything. So it's been phenomenal for me, to be honest. Like, it's probably been the biggest thing sort of sport-wise I've ever taken up and done and loved. So I love it. I could do it every day.
And what about that morning routine thing? That whole getting up crazy early, win the morning, win the day. Have you slackened off that? Is that still important to you?
It's important. I think mornings are important. Yeah, I think you read a lot, like you say, people get up at 4 a.m. and do these crazy things. I get up at 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock. I think that time is very precious, because whether you're working from home or going into commute, it's a very clear time of the day. Obviously, people have their own circadian rhythms, right? And again, I get back into the science of it. I'm a big Whoop fan. If you've slept well and if you've had a good night's sleep, your morning's going to be good. If you've slept terribly, your morning is going to be rubbish. So I
setting yourself up almost in advance, which is a big part of your, almost like a chess move.
Correct.
It
is like that. I mean, that's a good analogy. I think that you've got to put all the moving parts together. So mornings are important to me, but actually sometimes I do wake up and I'm tired and I haven't slept well. I work out in the afternoon. I don't make a thing out of it. I used to think it has to be like this, whereas actually, again, through wearables or whatever, you can actually understand your body and your mind much better to say, okay, I've had a great sleep, I'll work out at 5 a.m. or whatever it is. Actually, I've slept terribly last night. Why don't I just have a restful morning, do my workout in the evening or something like that? I've become much more linked with my mind, body, and kind of like energy to operate, do things when.
And you brought tech into it as well, which why not? There's people that are running scared of it. I mean, you can embrace it. Same with your social media. There's so many inspirational kind of ways of looking at things differently in the way you have. I'm conscious of time, and I could talk. I've got to say this, but I would love to end with a lot of people will be sort of watching, listening, and aspirationally like wanting to achieve what you've done and how you're now living. What advice would you give to someone in today's world? Because it has changed. AI is amongst us. And, so if you were interested in tech, ambitious, financially motivated, and you are, whether you're reinventing yourself, because I don't want to say a young entrepreneur, because that eliminates someone that could be like, I'm at a crossroads and I want to, but what advice would you give to someone looking in now?
Yeah, twofold. One would be make time to do real inner reflection. So really understand what are your motivations, personal, professional, do that kind of analysis of your life, etc., and really understand like who you are and what you want to do. I think again that takes time, takes energy, but like really get inward on yourself for a period to understand why it is you might want to pursue X, Y, and Z. On a professional level, I think the best way I can reference for someone to sort of start thinking about what would I do next? I'm going to start a business, whatever it might be, is scratch your own itch. I think the best products and the best services are created from problems you physically experienced. And even if that's not what you end up doing, it's an easier place to start, because I can say, I know these 5 things actually really bug me during my day. Is there ideas within that? Is there? And you can just start to create ideas around it. So if you don't necessarily know exactly where to start, think about scratching your own itch with the stuff that you face, and it will spark so many ideas. And the best products of life are genuinely created when people try to solve their own problems. So those are the two sort of thought process.
Phenomenal advice. I enjoy every time I get to spend with you, and I get to spend lots of time with you now, but this has been a brilliant conversation. Thank you, Alex.
No problems. Like it, mate. Love it.
Cheers.